Okay, with over 50 of you having joined, we'll make a start. We want to keep to time today. We will be finishing promptly at 1:30. So good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this stewardship webinar, Growing Legacy Income Through Collaboration. My name is Ruth Jackson. I'm a member of the Philanthropy Services team here at Stewardship, looking after our PR and communications. Joining me from the Philanthropy Services team are panelists and Head of Legal Rachel Steeden and Relationship Manager Megan Wilcock, who is kindly providing tech support today and trying to resolve that issue with chat. We're absolutely delighted to see so many of you on the call today. We have over 200 people signed up. I know some won't be able to join us in person, but we're absolutely delighted by that response. And we have also been really pleased to see that there are many of you coming in from all over the UK and indeed overseas. Before I introduce our panelists, a few housekeeping points. If you've just joined, you may have missed that the recording has now started. So we are recording the session today and we will send you a link to that recording afterwards. Live captions are also enabled. You can turn those on, if you don't know, by navigating to the accessibility tab in settings by your profile picture, and then under closed captioning, simply click the checkbox to enable always show captions. We are going to allow plenty of time for questions after the discussion, so please use the Q&A function to add those and then upvote to ensure we prioritise the most popular ones. Please use the chat if it kicks off. It looks like I think we are now in business, so that's great. Just to say hi and perhaps let us know where you're joining from today, and share your comments as we go through the next hour. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our panelists for today. So Lucinda, welcome. Lucinda Frostick is a director for Remember a Charity, which supports 200 charities who rely on gifts and wills to continue their good work. Lucinda is a charity sector PR expert who was previously an associate director at Turner PR, a communications agency for the sector, for 14 years. She has also led the communications at the Chartered Institute of Fundraising and for the Giving campaign. Through his agency, Radcliffe Consulting, Richard Radcliffe, welcome Richard, has been advising charities on how to develop legacy income for over 30 years. He has helped over 500 charities in over 30 countries around the world and works with every type of cause and charity or non-profit, from the very small to the multinationals. As previously mentioned, Rachel Steeden is our Head of Legal here at Stewardship, a Christian charity and donor advised fund which partners with donors, charities, churches and Christian workers to help release and facilitate generosity through a wide range of support services. Rachel is a solicitor with 17 years experience advising private clients and charities. She enjoys working closely with clients and their advisors to help donors make complex gifts effectively and tax efficiently. Rachel is a member of the Charity Law Association, STEP Special Interest Group for Philanthropy, Lawyers and Charities, and Lawyers Christian Fellowship. So today, we will be tackling the big topic of how we can collaborate more in a bid to grow legacy income. The sector is huge and disparate, as can be seen in the wide variety of organisations on this call. Our attendees today are mostly from the charity sector, but we do also have a couple of advisors on the call. And we recognise that everyone will be at a different point on their legacy income journey and have different needs. So our aim is to look at some of the top level issues affecting the legacy industry as a first, hopefully constructive step towards effective collaboration. Let's start with a little bit of scene setting by summarising the big trends and challenges facing legacy fundraisers right now. Lucinda, I'd like to start with you, please, if I may. Could you give us a little overview on the trends that you're seeing in the industry right now?
Hi, Ruth. Thank you for such a kind and welcoming intro. It's fantastic to be able to speak on today's panel. And we start with the very big questions, of course. What are the big trends and challenges? There are so many I'd love to highlight here, but I think if I were to summarize into just a few, legacies are an incredibly exciting space to be. And so the kind of the burgeoning word here in my mind is that we are in a space of growth. We're in an extremely fortunate place here in the UK And I know that we've got other colleagues from international organisations here and who are dialing in from abroad. And I think that growth in the UK market is by no means standalone. We're seeing legacy growth affecting very many markets internationally, and it's wonderful to see that, not least at such an urgent and desperate time for so many organisations as we consider the kind of the overarching economic backdrop that we've got here. So legacies are in this period of long-term growth. They've become an increasingly important source of income for charities, particularly through the pandemic, the cost of living crisis. And I think part and parcel of that is, of course, that there are a lot of factors here that we can't control. Legacy income is, of course, very closely linked to house prices and many other economic factors. But what we can influence is appetite. And what we're seeing is that appetite for legacy giving remains strong and, in fact, is growing. About 2 in 5 charity supporters over the age of 40 here have left a gift in their will already, and twice as many say they're willing to do so. So we're in a good space there in terms of appetite. And what we're also seeing is that appetite is shifting into action. And I'd say that there are 2 key factors there in terms of driving action. Will writing is just becoming that little bit easier. As for those of you that joined right at the very start of the call, Richard was just saying that he'd just written his will and it was so much easier than he thought it was going to be. And I think that is the case. It is getting more easy. There are more options to go about it. And crucially, we're also seeing that professional advisors are really key in that space. So more of them are raising the topic of legacy giving with their clients during will writing too. So specifically here, I'm talking about solicitors and will writers, but also there's a kind of growing sphere of professional advisors who are there, who are active and getting more engaged in those legacy giving conversations, which is a really important factor in terms of helping convert that appetite into action. I would just want to say that over the last 8 years alone, we've done our own benchmarking study of solicitors and will writers, and we can see that there's a 50% increase in the proportion of professionally written wills, so those written by a solicitor or will writer that includes a charity. So it's great to see that growth really there being driven by the role of professional advisors too. But going back to your question around trends, I've covered a little bit on growth. I also just wanted to reference diversity. I mean, we're seeing more and more charities named in wills. There's real diversity there in terms of the size of the organisation, as well as the kind of causes that are benefiting from gifts in wills, which again, I always think that's a really lovely barometer of the things that people care about. You know, what's more meaningful than to write a gift, a charity into your will. So it really is a really strong reflection, I think, of the breadth of causes, both at a community level and nationally, that people care about. And in terms of legacy fundraisers, there's more a sense of confidence around how they go about fundraising too. So that is really important. You asked too about challenges. And when I think about challenges, I won't go into too much detail here because I really want to ensure we can hear from other panelists too. But there are 2 things that really sprang to mind. One is, of course, the practical stuff. So when you've got a growing market like this, when the cat is well and truly out of the bag in terms of legacies growing fast and more charities want to benefit from that, it is a busy market. So I guess there's that practical thing, you know, how do charities stick their heads above the parapets? How do they tell their story? And how can they differentiate themselves and achieve that sort of that cut through? So there's that practical element there. But there's also the broader sector level stuff too. So by that, I mean, you know, what's happening in the wider environment that impacts legacies. So for us here at Remember a Charity, we've got quite an active policy agenda at the moment, and a couple of things we're looking at are things like probate delays. For those of you outside of the UK, probate is the process that has to be gone through to ensure that assets can be released from an estate. There are some hefty old delays there, which have been exacerbated in recent years due to increasing death rates post the pandemic, and also a rise in population level as well. So as that's taking longer and longer, charities it's more and more difficult for charities to forecast, and it's just taking longer to get that money through. So issues like that, as well as ministers calling on inheritance tax to be culled, which again, we know there are very generous tax reliefs linked to legacy giving. Those are 2 kind of areas of concern for us, which could pose a real challenge for the sector.
Thank you so much, Lucinda. Such an encouraging start going back to the trends and that big picture of growth. And I'm sure a lot of the smaller charities represented on this call would be very encouraged by the diversity message as well. but you've rightly also given a little bit of balance there with a couple of the challenges. Richard, can I bring you in on that, please? Just to elaborate a bit more on the challenges you're seeing from your perspective.
The challenge, it's really funny, the legacy landscape over the last 30 years has changed beyond belief, and especially the prospect landscape. I mean, it's really nice to see over 90 open-minded, forward-thinking legacy fundraisers join this webinar. But there are a group of fundraisers who are grim reapers, who are stuck in a TARDIS that's stuck in the 1990s, who still think that the only people who leave legacies are single women without family, which was the case 35 years ago. It was up to 87% of all legacies were from single women. Now, of course, people without a family are prime prospect suspect, but actually that is one of the biggest changes that we've seen. So we now have about 60-40, 60% female, 40% male from SME and Ford. But actually gender is not an issue at all, because equally men and women are now favourable to leaving a gift in their will. I think that the challenges we have are still multifarious, sadly. We have immense problems with boards. So I've presented to now 54 boards since the start of COVID. And every trustee still says, well, when are we going to get the money and how much will it be? So I just turn around and say, well, when you get a dime, how much will you be worth? And they can't answer it, nor can anybody else. But they still say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Can you still tell us? And the answer is you can't. But when you look at the fact that, you know, when I started, 1,200 charities benefited from legacies, and the income was 1.2 billion, and it's now 4 billion, with 10,000 charities benefit. And as Lucinda said, the spectrum and diversity of charities receiving legacies is absolutely awesome. But the challenges are still to do with fundraisers catching up with donors, because I think donors have changed faster than fundraisers. And we're very apprehensive to be different and to dare to be different. And there's a huge controversy over something I've been promoting for 4 or 5 years now, which is the 1% legacy. And everybody says, oh, well, it'll only leave 1%. Just for your point of interest, I've met 37 donors in focus groups in the last 3 out of 4 working days. What was so interesting is 29 of them have decided to leave a gift in their will when they heard about the 1%, because most of them had actually just left a very small cash sum. And the result was that all of them were going, oh, and so I said at the end, are you likely to leave 1%? And no, not one person said they were going to leave 1%. They said they'd probably leave more. And it's just an opening pitch. It's not an ask. It is opening the pitch for them to say, yeah, I can be part of that. But it's all about the wording. And the biggest challenge is trying to get fundraisers, let alone boards, to try and make sure that we attract legacies into all charities by every possible prospect and not by the minority. Now we'll go into all the different ways that they give now, because it's not just a typical gift in a typical will, but we've got more questions on how baby boomers are behaving, and they are very, very different. But if you take the last 2,000 or 3,000 people I've met who are aged over 55, will making is one of the biggest challenges, because actually 85% already have a will, because we're interested only in people probably really aged over 50 who have something to leave. But those who have something to leave have advisors, which is why everybody must collaborate, whether it's a financial services advisor, a solicitor, or a wealth advisor, because those are the ones who will agree. But you need to prepare them. You need to get in the planning process of will making much earlier than we thought originally 30 years ago. So the challenge, the other challenge is to actually get the legacy message out when you have a bunch of young communicators in communication departments who say you can't talk about legacies and death on website. Yes, you can. So there's still a huge conversion job to get people to participate, whether it's communication teams, whether it's boards to have trust and confidence in their supporters, because actually the donors are ready and waiting if you do it right.
Thank you, Richard. Go on, Rachel.
If I pick up with what Richard was saying about the change in demographic, I think that's also important to note for those of us on the call who are advisors. I guess traditionally, when you were helping a client make their will, you talk about how they wanted to support a surviving spouse, if any, and dependents, if any. And then you might talk about charity in the context of, let's call it the car crash scenario. Everyone's wiped out, the backstop beneficiary. But actually, that's not good enough. We need to be, as advisors, asking clients about whether they want to put a charitable gift up front, even on the first death. And so many baby boomers have more to leave than they would want their children to have. And so as advisors, we need to be having those conversations front and centre, and not just for that terrible backstop scenario.
I'd agree with that, although I do think what the cost of living and COVID world has done has introduced a much more fragile family environment in terms of financial and inheritance planning, because they're so uncertain as to what their children might need if they've just been made redundant or the partnership's fallen apart. So I think that there is a cautiousness, but it's interesting because I think all this encourages charitable legacies. I mean, donations haven't gone up in 10 or 15 years in the United Kingdom. And during that time, legacies have gone up by 50%. So, it's absolutely superb. But I do think that if we have intelligent baby boomers who are planning in depth and they're worried about their finances, then legacies are perfect because they don't leave the bank account now.
So we've got, sorry, Lucinda, do jump in. I was going to invite you. I wanted you to comment on, because we've had this sort of really lively picture of a very dynamic, exciting industry. It's booming, there's growth, there's change, it's exciting. But as often with change, we've got quite a vivid picture there from Richard of some of the challenges. So Lucinda, yeah, maybe this is where you're going to jump in anyway, but I wanted to ask you about how you see the industry responding to those changes, but by all means do jump in and make the point you wanted to make as well if it was different.
I think it is linked. Thank you, Ruth. I was just thinking that the way that people approach their giving, I think sometimes we can be, as the charity sector, can be a little bit too segmented in our approach, and actually it's about broadening that conversation, isn't it? Starting to drip feed the legacy message much earlier and ensuring people can consider that sort of at the front end. Because when you start to think about how you want to be remembered, when you start to think about the causes that you want to include in your will, it's such a fantastic sort of framing. It's a very sort of deep, symbolic kind of way of approaching your giving. And I think once you start having that thought process, you're perhaps in a much better place to structure your giving altogether. So particularly when it comes to advisors and the conversations that they might be having with clients, particularly perhaps philanthropy advisors, I think having those conversations at the front end can be really helpful in creating a more holistic giving experience for their supporters, but also getting a real sense of what it is that they really want to support, and can ensure that they can have that thinking at the front end rather than just coming at it sort of towards the back end of their giving journey.
I'd agree entirely. I think there's another point there as well, and that is that wealth advisors and solicitors are both really, really important, but the sector generally, Lucinda, I think, is focused on the spring and the autumn, which is when we know from Smith and Ford are the most popular will-making months, which is actually a disaster. And the reason it's a disaster is you don't want to go to people when they've made their will. You want to go when they're planning their will, and we never know when they're planning their will because they might be writing it on New Year, New Wills, Valentine's Day on the 14th of February, might be men doing it in remembrance or when their parents have died or some awful things happen to them or they've won the lottery. And that drip, 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 or drip, drip, drop, as I say, is actually really, really, really important.
So we're seeing a little bit of an emerging theme here that, while many organisations will be at a different stage of their journey, there's this trend perhaps towards a more sophisticated and structured approach. Maybe that's not commonplace yet, but it's the sort of general direction of travel. So can we kind of get a little bit more into the detail of what that more structured approach looks like? And Rachel, if I can bring you in here, just to give a bit of an overview on the donor advised fund or DAF model,
Sure.
for example.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so we have seen huge growth, as have the other donor advised fund providers in the UK in recent years. The DAF model is increasingly being recognised as a really good way to start building your legacy during your lifetime. Rather than all the complication and expense of running a family charitable trust, with a DAF, you can enjoy giving, you can start connecting with those causes already, start connecting the next generation to those causes, start building a balance that you may then add to on your death. And I think it was Chuck Feeney that really popularised this idea of giving while living. Why not give while you're around to enjoy it? that kind of an idea. Why would you leave your legacy to a DAF? Well, from the donor's perspective, there's a few reasons. One is flexibility. If I go to a solicitor and I say I want to leave, let's say 1%, to take Richard's example, of my estate to stewardship, that goes into my will, and then I can write an expression of wishes to stewardship, which says, for example, I'd like you to take my fund and split it between my 2 children, and I'd like them to have the joy of choosing where it goes. Or you could say, I'd like you to take my fund and divide it between the following 5 charities. That expression of wishes is private between you and the DAF provider, unlike the will, which becomes public upon death. And you can change your expression of wishes whenever you like, as often as you like, without going to see a solicitor. So that gives the donor real flexibility and lots of options. A DAF is perhaps going to be more easily equipped than some smaller charities who are less used to receiving legacies to handle legacies that are a bit more complicated types of property, that sort of thing. Perhaps lay executors might find it easier to deal with one DAF rather than to deal with multiple different charities, although I know a lot of charities are very collaborative in terms of a lead to charity approach. I guess looking at it then from the legacy fundraiser's perspective, the worry would be that the DAF might act as a barrier in their relationship to the pledger or the executors. So we've been thinking about that at Stewardship and thinking about how can we make sure that we're facilitating and not acting as a barrier. And so one thing we've done practically is we've changed our own comms so that now if a donor writes to us and says, my expression of wishes is that you distribute my legacy to these charities, we write back to them and say, thank you so much. Please consider contacting those charities and telling them you've done that so that you guys can then include that donor in your legacy pledger stewardship. Because when we're dealing with a gift from someone who's actually died, we are very much trying to facilitate the communication between the executors and the benefiting charities about particular wishes for the use of the legacy, or if the legacy fundraisers have got questions that they need to understand about the source of the funds or whatever it might be, we can facilitate that partnership, deal with all the practical stuff, the admin, take that off your hands, but help you build the relationship with the pledger or with the executors. So that's our aim as the DAF, to help you guys, not to be a barrier.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
Richard,
would you like to come in and just add a couple more points?
The interesting thing is the donors I've met who've either opened a DAF, not just obviously through Stewardship, but other providers as well, are very keen often to maintain their anonymity, but to maintain professional advice. And that is what the DAF does, without a shadow of a doubt. They're also pretty sensitive donors. And if a charity's over stewarding their pledge, then they're very likely to step back and take the legacy out. It's what we call the hokey-cokey legacy syndrome, which is happening with rampant commonality nowadays, because they want to make sure their investment is well used. And DAF will give them incredible flexibility. I don't think I'd agree with Rachel that the DAF is a barrier. What I think it is I think it's just a risk that it's so easy to change your mind that the charity will never really know what's going to happen. But that is so donor-centric, it's brilliant.
Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Did you want to add anything more? Just going in a little bit more sort of specifically on things like insurance policies. If you could just comment on that, that'd be great.
I mean, I think and I know there are questions about pension pots. I mean, there are so many ways of giving that aren't in your will, which can be hugely beneficial. And a lot of people who have a really generous pension pot are just allocating where possible, because I don't think all pensioners, I'm not a tax expert or a wealth advisor, and I'm not rich enough to prove I am one either. But I do think the pension pots are brilliant, because if you can have in your pension a charity as a beneficiary, it is absolutely brilliant. It doesn't affect your estate, which is lovely. And it's exactly the same. A number of people are doing the same with life insurance policies. But also, I mean, what I think is so popular now is this letter of wishes, which a DAF has, which I have. And my solicitor advised my charitable legacies to go into the letter of wishes, because it adds evidence to the judge that it is my wish and therefore cannot be contested. So we sent it to 2 judges, one last night, actually. And he said, no, it's absolutely right. It actually is a much better instrument So rather like the DAF letter of wishes and my letter of wishes, they're actually increasing the watertightness of the will. But also the number of deeds of variation that baby boomers are passing on is going through the roof. So I was with a charity on Friday, and they just got one of 180,000, where somebody had changed the will of their parent who died. The last parent had died, and they didn't need the money. They're baby boomers, and they didn't want it, so they changed their will as they were an executor to the estate, passed everything over inheritance threshold to the charity I was with, and gave the rest, the 325, to the kids. And that is staggeringly common now. I've known them up to about £500,000, where a deed of variation can be done. But we're talking, baby boomers, really, they're intelligent people, and they know how to deal with these things, but they don't always know about deeds of variation. They don't know they can give their pension pot. They don't know they can give life insurance policies.
Richard, just coming back to, sorry, Lucinda, do you want to just comment on that before we move on?
Well,
yeah.
I don't want to take us too far off topic, but I just thought it might be helpful to stand back from this a moment and think, the large number of legacies left out there aren't necessarily the kind of sizable examples that we're perhaps considering that might be linked through a DAF, or that as per kind of the size and scale of the wonderful example that Richard just gave around a deed of variation. But that sort of thinking about that sort of takes me back to the position around the importance of that minority of gifts that are high value legacies, and how important it is for us as a sector to nurture that. And that is really key. And going back to your question around how the industry itself, how the sector itself is responding to these changes, these wider sort of market changes, it really is, thinking about what we can do to work together to build our understanding around high value legacies, to work to ensure that when we look at things from a donor's perspective, that we are collaborating better, that we're offering them these kind of sophisticated giving channels, but also that we don't shy away from using the right kind of language that might inspire them to think about using a legacy, even in its simplest form as a gift in a will. That might be significant and sizable too. There's a whole host of different options, and I think it's really important that people can choose the best option for them.
I think it's where that choice comes, isn't it? It's where that choice comes, Lucinda. Sorry to interrupt, but I do think that, all the baby boomers are saying, just keep it simple. And what I wouldn't want anybody to take away the message from today is suddenly on their website are giving deeds of variation, letters of wishes, pension pots, life insurance, specific legacy, residuary legacy, contingent legacy, and go on, because they'll just look at the whole choice and go, oh, stuff it, I can't be bothered. And I do think that's where we've got a really interesting challenge, is how we collaborate. The sector collaborates with the legal profession and wealth advisors and financial services for them to give the advice that is needed by their client. And I think, obviously, all the stewardship solicitors are utterly perfect. Hi, Rachel. But there are a bunch of solicitors out there who are very antagonistic toward charities, and that's a big change.
I couldn't agree with you more, Richard. And for me, I guess the way I often look at this is it's about getting legacies there on the menu for high value supporters who might be considering other ways that they want to use their money to drive change, and helping them see that this can be such a powerful way, no matter which particular vehicle they use, but to have that transformative impact, or to have an impact that they really want to drive and create. And that's such a powerful thing, and that's what we all can help to achieve here. And I think ultimately, for everybody listening on the call, that's what we want, isn't it? We want to empower and inspire the public to give in the best way for them, and for them to have the impact that they know that they're most able to do.
I think we're very much getting to the heart of the matter here, aren't we? What's emerging as absolutely key is being really donor centric, which seems really obvious. Why wouldn't we put our donors at front and center? But perhaps in reality, in terms of what that actually means and how we support donors with their legacy development and arrangements, that it's different from how it used to be, and the collaboration is that we're really focused on today is kind of at the heart of the piece, in terms of really step changing what success and impact looks like. So let's get into that, because it's very easy, isn't it, to kind of, oh yes, let's be donor centric, we must all collaborate. and everyone's like, well, yes, of course. But what does that actually mean? So let's get into some of the detail of that. Rachel, could I bring you in here just to lead this bit of the discussion?
Yes, thank you, Ruth. Well, as you're saying, I think starting with the donor's perspective is so important. And one thing that needs then is better collaboration between professional advisors, solicitors, will writers, financial advisors, and legacy fundraising teams. My experience when I was in private practice was that sometimes legacy fundraisers would come in to talk to me and would be sort of trying to persuade me of the validity of their particular cause, whether that was animals or health or whatever it was. There's no point in doing that. As an advisor, I was never going to try and persuade my client to leave their legacy to donkeys or cancer or whatever. My role was cause neutral. Indeed, a stewardship still is. But it was a really good thing for legacy fundraisers to come and talk to me and other solicitors and just make sure that with everything else we've got to think about, that asking the question is on the radar, asking the client, do you currently support a charity? Are there charities you might want to include in your will? Raising things like the reduced rate of inheritance tax if you leave 36%, reduced 36% rate if you leave 10% of your estate to charity. All those, I think legacy fundraisers in their communications with professional advisors are just trying to keep the whole legacy issue on the advisor's radar, but it's a real turn off for advisors if they feel like they're being sort of recruited as evangelists for a particular charitable cause, because that's not appropriate advice. It's not the role of the advisor to push their client into a particular charitable cause. Lucinda didn't ask me to say this, but can I just say that Remember a Charity's Professional Advisor Bulletin is really helpful, and there was a great article on that a couple of days ago, written to professional advisors, but from the perspective of legacy fundraisers, explaining, why do we ask all these annoying questions like estate accounts, and really helping solicitors to understand the charity's perspective a little bit better. So can I encourage you to get any advisor friends signed up to that bulletin?
Oh, thank you.
There is one further issue which solicitors, I think, are really bad at. I'm terribly sorry, you're obviously brilliant. But some solicitors are really bad. And that is, they will not give legacy fundraisers access to the next of kin so that they can say thank you to the surviving relative of the legator. And that produces nothing but down-to anger if that relationship isn't there. And I'd give anything to know how to change solicitors so that they do. They keep saying they'll pass the letter on, but they don't. And that I find really frustrating, because the whole load of relatives must think the charities are evil, grabbing money grabbing, what's it? And it is, I think it's a really big issue.
It's wonderful to hear. I know we do pass on letters when we get thank yous for deceased staff donors. We definitely pass them on. I can promise that.
I knew you were perfect, Rachel.
Okay.
Richard, what are your thoughts on getting into some of the detail of collaboration? For example, you were referencing before the important role of expression of wishes. So what are your thoughts in terms of the collaboration piece and that?
I think that the real trouble is that we never really meet enough solicitors and wealth advisors. And I do think wealth advisors are incredibly important, because they're part of the planning process often before you go to your solicitor. But there doesn't seem to be a route that opens up satisfactory relationships to enable greater collaboration. There's no point in me doing it. I'm just a slimy consultant. They won't pay any attention to me at all. Now, they might pay attention to stewardship, and they might to Remember a Charity, or even possibly more the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, because they'll see that as an official body, rather like the Law Society. But I remember when I was running SME and Forward, we applied twice to see if we could do a plenary session at an annual conference of the Law Society, but we were never allowed to, which I thought was always really disappointing. Because my God, I'd love to go and take part in that, I tell you. But there isn't anything, there's nothing within the financial services world either that really kind of brings people together to collaborate, which I think is a big hole, really.
I suppose it's not immediately instinctive. I mean, we all inhabit very different worlds, don't we? The world of the fundraiser, the advisor, then more sort of neutral intermediaries like Remember Charity. You know, we're all in very different worlds. We have different cultures, different language, and it doesn't feel perhaps immediately the most instinctive thing in the world, apart from which everyone's ever so slightly busy.
But their clients, the charity clients, the solicitor clients, and the wealth advisor clients are the ones that bring all of us together.
Right. Lucinda, we've chatted quite a bit about external collaboration, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. But there's something about internal collaboration as well. Could you expand on that, please?
I'm so glad you just asked that. I was just scribbling away to myself while while Richard was talking, because yes, absolutely, we need to collaborate externally. So we need to collaborate as a sector to make more noise about legacy fundraising, to ensure that we can get it on the agenda for wealth advisors, for solicitors, for will writers. Remember Charity, that's something we've been doing for quite a while when it comes to kind of professional advisors in the legal space. We're only just moving really into sort of the wealth advisor space, and we're learning as we go, every step as we go. So do watch this space. We hope that we'll have more news to share on that. But I think what is really key is that internal collaboration too, particularly for larger charities. You know, we can all be accused of not necessarily being that joined up, even in smaller organizations. You know, have we remembered to tell the person we sit next to, or on the next Zoom screen, about whatever it is that was really important, a really helpful conversation with a donor. I think when it comes to particularly securing high value legacies, it's going to be all the more important that we're drawing together those teams. So in larger charities where there might be a major donor team or a philanthropy team, they're working more closely, more joined up, in a more joined up way with legacy teams and vice versa. But even in the smallest organization too, I think it's articulating and giving confidence to all those across the organization that might be in a position where they might be able to have that all-important conversation with a donor. You don't know when the opportunity is going to strike. And it's really just giving people the tools they need, the information they need, the confidence they need, to open up that conversation, and to not be afraid that this is a conversation about death, because of course conversations about legacy fundraising are often labeled as a conversation about death. They're so far from it. They are about being about the future impact. They are so far into kind of that future gazing space. Yes, I appreciate there's that small hurdle of death being a barrier that we need to get through in order to free up that income, but really the conversation should be future gazing. So the collaboration needs to begin from the very heart of the organization before you start even working externally.
I agree entirely, Lucinda. The one thing that absolutely fascinates me about this is none of us have mentioned the governing body of the charitable world, the Charity Commission. And here we are sitting here, but you know, it's the Charity Commission who are really the official body of the charity sector. And do they support any of this at all? And there's a total lack of collaboration. They give no guidance on legacies at all. And I've been urging them to do so for 25 years. And they really do not play their part in helping prove the needs of the sector in what is increasingly heading towards the biggest source of voluntary income. If anybody's here from the Charity Commission, I'd love to speak to them.
I don't think we do actually, Richard.
But it's sad. It's sad.
Rachel, I'd just like to come back to you for a moment. Thank you for your insights on that. Just come back to the professional advisor perspective. So if you're an advisor, you're trying to sort of take on board this idea that, you know, with everything else you've got going on, that legacy is something that you really ought to have on the agenda when you next talk to your clients. I mean, that's all well and good, but how would you recommend that professional advisors should start those conversations? And I mean, we've kind of covered this, but you know, why should they? Like, I mean, you've been on that side. You know, you know how busy you are. You know, every 15 minutes is expensive. So, you know, with everything else that an advisor has on their plate, why and how do they talk about this?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I think it's really helpful to start with the why. I mean, Lucinda was talking about the legacy fundraising space as being a crowded market. Well, the private wealth advisory market is also a crowded market. And as a private wealth advisor or solicitor or will writer, how do you stand out? How do you build sticky relationships with clients that means that you'll advise their children and their grandchildren maybe one day as well? Well, it's by those conversations that get under the skin. And what are those conversations? Those are the conversations about purpose of wealth. What is the money for? Especially, I'm assuming here we're talking about the privileged proportion of the population who've got more than they need to feed and clothe themselves, and that's what we're talking about here in terms of talking about legacy prospects. we see increasing demand from clients for those conversations about purpose of wealth. Look at all kinds of conversations about the climate emergency. Look at the good ancestor movement, people thinking about, well, where does my money come from? Am I rich because my great-great-grandparents enslaved people? All those conversations about purpose of wealth. And then as you talk to the client about what their money is for, charitable giving and charitable legacies just flow naturally out of that conversation. I never had a client upset to be asked those kind of questions. Generally, they appreciate you taking an interest in them as a person, treating them as an individual with values, with their own worldview, their own beliefs. And I found most clients welcome that conversation, and it shows you're not, you really understand, you want to understand what makes them tick as a person. So I would say, feels slightly scary if you're an advisor who's not in the habit of having those conversations, but just go for it and you'll probably find it's welcomed.
Could I jump in at that point just to add, well, firstly, thank you, Rachel, for articulating that far better than I ever could. But we've just done some focus groups with wealth advisors and a broader range of professional advisors too. And amongst that sort of 40 or so, the main kind of thrust of the message that came out of that is that no, it's not something many are doing right now in terms of having these kind of conversations with their clients and talking about legacy giving. But just as you said, Rachel, there is a role for them to be seed planters, to have those conversations, to get under the skin of the things that their clients really care about. And that is, there's immense appetite to do that. There's also trepidation and nerves about how to go about it, and are these conversations really going to be comfortable with their clients? But I think a bit like, take the charity sector back 10, 20 years ago, we ourselves were in exactly the same space. And still, I know for many, many organizations, when I speak to legacy fundraisers, their trustees are worried about them opening up conversations about gifts and wills with their supporters. It hasn't gone away. There is that nervousness, but again, it's about, once people understand that the conversation is about the things that people care about, it's not about their death. And it's not about pitching people against their family either. It's about considering the person in the fullest sense and all those things they care about. And that's the wonderful thing about legacies, isn't it? That you do have that scope to reflect all those different cares and concerns within a will or another similar vehicle.
Yeah. If there's anyone on the board who'd like to do a little bit more thinking about that, can I just throw in a cheeky book recommendation? Oh, it's not going to show on the screen. I will pop it in the chat. It's a book called Advising Philanthropists by Emma Beeston and Beth Breeze, who run a philanthropy course at University of Kent. It's what's it, about 150 pages. You can read it in a couple of hours. It's a brilliant introduction to how to have those conversations. If that's something you would like to do before you don't know where to start, brilliant investment in a couple of hours time. I'll pop the details in the chat.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm mindful of time. We've got a few questions. So if I may, I'm going to turn our attention to those. I'll start going through those, and we'll see who's best placed to take those. And please do, if you have, I think somebody may have put some questions in the chat. If you can just pop them over into the Q&A, and then we won't miss them. And you can also upvote as well if there's one that you particularly like us to answer. So starting from the top, I'm just going to answer this one live. So question from Sally. Thank you for the question, Sally. Sally Redmond. Given that baby boomers have much of their wealth tied up in pensions, has anyone got any advice or experience on how we could engage with potential legators and encourage using their pension pots somehow to tie into legacy giving? Any volunteers to take that one, please?
Well, a number of my clients make sure that they involve solicitors or wealth advisors in the frequently asked questions in their e-news and newsletters, so that there'll be a whole series of articles on, can I give some of my pension pot to charity? Can I allocate part of my life insurance policy? Can I leave some shares? What is a deed of variation? And I do think we've got to get more people, because charities can't give legal advice. That's against the code of practice. And therefore involving people to help open up the conversations with donors on your website and in newsletters is increasingly common. But that is the role of a wealth advisor and a solicitor. It's not the role of the charity, which is why we like to see so much greater collaboration from other professionals.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say it's an area that we have on the cards to look at in a more in-depth and structured way, because I agree. I think there's huge amounts of opportunity there, but it really does require a little bit more kind of focused thinking and narrative. And one of the things we're looking at doing, so in terms of how we engage with things with audiences like wealth managers, it's really made us realize that we need to think not only about how we engage with advisors, but the messaging that we give to supporters. If this is the kind of conversations that wealth managers are going to have, for example, with their clients, are going to be around high value legacy gifts. So does our consumer messaging match up to that? Does it support that? Does it go far enough? Does it help inspire those transformative gifts? So when it comes to thinking about different advisors, I think we also need to get that step into the process first. And then the same will apply to pensions. What messaging do we therefore need to convey to the public in order to inspire them to do this? And therefore, which advisors then do we work with, and what are we saying to them? What support materials and resources are we giving them? So yeah, watch this space. Again, that's something that we'd love to come back to in the next year or two. It's in our strategy, but to be updated.
That's brilliant, Lucinda, as always, and you're doing a great job at Remember a Charity. But I have to say, I think the role of the charity is to plant the seed of the idea, and then you pass it over to the wealth advisor or solicitor to fulfil their role, which I do think is incredibly important to make sure we don't infringe on their space or others. But on the other hand, I have come across and I've seen letters from charities to executors that are absolutely appallingly aggressive in terms of grabbing the assets of their relative, if it's the next of kin, and the professional executor handling the estate. And there's still a lot of education within charities to really enhance your brand and reputation through good communication with collaborators.
Thank you, Richard. Next question is actually for Rachel. This is from Robin Peake. Instead of the DAF asking the donors to contact the charity and let them know they've pledged, could the DAF do that on the donor's behalf with their permission and provide that as an extra service to the donor and to values?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. That's a brilliant question. Yeah, I mean, we certainly could with the donor's permission. I think that's one that Ruth and I should take back to our team for a chat about. I love the idea, and I see why that could be really good for charities. I guess the challenge is Richard's point, that one of the very reasons why some people come to DAFs is because they want to be quite discreet about their giving. And I imagine that even so, we're a Christian charity. Many of our donors come at their giving from a strongly Christian perspective, and for many of them that includes a sort of theological conviction that their giving ought to be anonymous. And so we have to walk that tightrope quite carefully in explaining to donors why it's actually really good for their favourite cause for us to put them in touch and tell them about the pledge, but without kind of frightening off those who come to us precisely because they want to keep their head below the parapet. But thank you, Robin. That's a good challenge for me to take back to the team.
Thank you, Rachel. Next question is from Sally Redmond. And actually, a couple of people have upvoted this one. Must we have to pass thanks on through solicitors? Given that it's just a thank you, could we not think directly and tell solicitors that we're doing so?
Absolutely, you can thank directly if you have the details to do so. I guess that if the donor wasn't already kind of on your books, you might not have the details to thank directly without involving solicitors, but obviously please do if you do have the details.
But there's also the fact that we won't necessarily, as a charity, you might not necessarily know what family they've got. You won't know they've got children. If they've been widowed, you wouldn't know they'd have children necessarily, and that's the difficulty. And the children then get really het up that charity's taken half their estate.
Just to jump in on a related point, of course, that solicitors, professional will writers, wealth advisors, and so on, are not only incredibly powerful advocates. So nurturing through the process is wonderful because you know how much that message can snowball. But there's also, there are people who may choose to leave a gift to charity in their will too. So always sort of having that in the back of your mind. It's not necessarily going to be appropriate to make an ask, but just always nurturing those relationships, each and every relationship, be it solicitor, executor, wealth manager, always crucial.
Great, thank you, Lucinda. Got a question now. Again, it's been upvoted. Got a couple of votes here from Louise Carey. Thank you for the question, Louise. This is coming in from Louise at Queen's University. And the question is, what is the best way to make contacts with solicitors and so on to keep legacy giving conversations on their radar? Events, letters, leaflet, phone call, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think it's important that it's framed as, CPD for the solicitor and doesn't come across as you trying to recruit them to recruit for your particular charitable cause, because it's just not appropriate for a solicitor to be trying to push their client towards education rather than poverty relief, for example. That's just not appropriate. But if you can frame it as, hey, this is us offering you effectively CPD around how you interact well with charitable beneficiaries, for example, or through things like Lucinda's Professional Advisors Bulletin, that kind of thing, where it's useful education and knowledge sector stuff for the solicitors, that I think is going to go down better than an appeal for a particular cause.
I think it depends on the cause. Sorry, go on, Viv, go on.
Well, I was just going to say very quickly as well, in case it's helpful, we also have a directory of charity-friendly, if you like, solicitors and will writers who are all signed up as campaign supporters on our website. So do have a look and see if you can find local, solicitors in your area or those that operate in a particular field that might help you. Essentially, what they do, they've committed to include the reference to charitable giving, to legacy giving with their will writing clients. So it just could be helpful for you.
Yeah, you're not putting on an open door then.
Yeah.
Looking at it from Queen's point of view over in Belfast, it'll be very different for you than it would a hospice in Northern Ireland, for instance, because a hospice in Northern Ireland, most of your solicitors will be local in Northern Ireland, and therefore they'd probably be fascinated if you're a hospice to come to an event to actually see a behind-the-scenes tour of the hospice. And then you can tell them how, the fact that 30% of your income is from gifts and wills, and you'd really value their help, and they're witnessing the impact. The trouble is with Queen's is your alumni around the world, so you can't easily invite all the solicitors or attorneys or lawyers or anything else or notaries that might be involved because they're spread over the world. And so I think you've got a much bigger challenge if you're a university with global alumni than you are if you're a local charity as a hospice.
Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, moving on to the next question. How can the board of a charity best support the organisation's legacy fundraising efforts?
Richard,
Resign.
I feel that I should let you backtrack from the word resign before I jump in on that one.
Who's going to answer that? I mean, honestly, the real trouble is they believe in the most ridiculous statistics, like the average value of a legacy when it depends on the cause and the region. The real trouble is I think we need leadership from people like collaboration with Akivo far more greatly, so that Akivo can tell the chief executives of charities of the dangers of assuming a legacy trend when legacy trends are so volatile, especially with the delays in grants of probate now up to about 42,000. And I think that there is so much enlightening, but that's why I love going to boards, because I try to convince them to put in a real minimal target, which is ridiculously low, but it gets rid of the risk, and they're worried about the risk, and they're always looking to the short-term or even long-term future when you don't know what it is. It's education, education, education.
Just to add to what Richard said, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There are two steps there. There's you've got to have the information, the education in place to ensure that they can be true advocates, and then it's utilising their role as advocates. Working closely with the chief exec, working closely with other senior managers, and working closely with trustees to ensure they all get it and they're all open and prepared to have a legacy conversation. But they also need to understand that the return, for many organizations who are just perhaps on this call and just moving into legacy fundraising, you might not have any returns to show already, and it may take a few years for it to come through, but it's really worth the wait. So again, having the confidence to not just dip out again after, testing the water a little bit with legacy fundraising. Think about some other ways that you can measure engagement with the legacy messaging, not just about the income that it draws in, because that will take some time. And then once you've started to have that trickle, I would hope that legacies would certainly sell themselves, because it's an incredibly strong financial story in terms of ROI.
We still need the collaboration of the Charity Commission, where they issue the leaflet on the responsibility of trustees and the responsibility of trustees in terms of fundraising, as to they would give some guidance for trustees about legacy giving and legacy income and how to measure it.
I think we'll make sure to invite a representative, I think, for the next one in the series, Richard, if there is going to be demand for that. Really mindful of time, but I want to try and squeeze in at least one more question. So this one's from Christelle. What's the best way to deal with a supporter who wants to leave a one-off donation to the charity instead of leaving a legacy in their will? After writing their will, we often get supporters who want to leave a donation instead of a gift in their will. Lucinda, I'm going to pass this one to you in the first instance.
So that's a really interesting one, because I'm tempted to ask a question back, which is, what is the will writing offer that they're responding to that's inspired them to leave a donation on the side? You know, is it a free will writing offer, in which case I think there's often a temptation to make a cash gift then and there and feeling like you've done your bit, you've paid for your will, or is it something that's come through by other means? I think the end of the day, you've got to allow people to give how they want to give. So it's about continuing to maybe the phrase "bang the legacy drum" is perhaps a bit too harsh in this sense, but continuing to tell inspiring stories around the impact of gifts in wills, why they make such a considerable difference to your cause, how that enables you to continue good work for the long term, and why that kind of longer term thinking is so important for the organization. We do need to allow people to give in the way that they're most comfortable, but I'd have a look again at the will writing offer, and I would think really carefully about what you can do to really market that legacy message even stronger.
Richard, I wasn't quite sure the size of the gift though. Was this a substantial gift? What was the question?
It was just, I don't think it was quantified. It was just a gift.
Okay, I mean, I would suggest that you thank them incredibly well for the gift, so that they've got a real sense of gratitude of their donation. Because once they feel that you're caring for them in terms of the donation, then they'll probably convert themselves into a legator during their journey if you treat them really well. In other words, not a bog standard template letter, but a really nice personalised one. Because if they're going to be thanked well, and then you've got the usual thread of legacy messages during the year, they'll probably do it themselves.
Thank you, Richard.
Ruth, I'm conscious we're running out of time, but I'd love to see the results of the Zoom poll we had at the beginning, if Megan's got those.
Ooh,
okay.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
The challenge to Megan to pop this up if she can while we're finishing the call. We are going to, there we go. So 65% have a will.
Interesting. So someone's got some homework to do then.
Thank you everyone for sharing that. We are almost out of time. I do want to respect everyone's time today. Thank you so much for all your input. Very, very quickly, right? Challenge to each of you. What's your number one takeaway point for the audience today? Rachel, 20 seconds.
I guess my main audience is professional advisors, and my takeaway is have the conversation with your client. It will probably be welcomed.
Okay, great. Thank you. Richard?
I'd probably agree, because I'm not going to go different to Rachel, because we'll just take time up and start arguing what the biggest one is. I couldn't agree more. We need to collaborate more.
Okay. And Lucinda?
Just to build on what Richard said, collaboration is always my sort of go-to word, really. I'm a huge believer in it. But I think, just continue to share wonderful stories of the impact that legacy giving can have. That's so inspirational for donors, for other charities too, to learn from, and also from advisors. So let's keep talking about legacies and hopefully continuing to change the wonderful world we have around us with gifts and wills.
And let's get more solicitors as legators as well.
Thank you. Well, we are very much out of time. So just very quickly in the last couple of minutes, big thank you to our panelists, Lucinda, Richard and Rachel, for a really stimulating discussion today. Megan, thank you for your technical support behind the scenes. And of course, thank you to all of you for coming and contributing with your comments and questions. It's been a really, really lively discussion. We would welcome any follow-up queries you may have. Apologies, we've got one or two questions we didn't manage to answer today, but we'll pick those up and come back to you after the session. Got up on the screen a couple of QR codes if you'd like to find out more, hear more from Remember a Charity and or Radcliffe Consulting. And finally, we'd be really grateful if you would take just a couple of minutes to complete. We've got a quick feedback survey, which you can access again by scanning the QR code on the last slide. That just leaves me with a minute to just thank you again for your time today. We wish you all a very good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.